So my name's Kerri. I am a co-founder of Vegan Support the Farmers. So you might have seen me from one of my greatest hits with Mr. Broccoli. I've been with Animal Rebellion since the very beginning. And I've been part of slaughterhouse shutdowns when we shut down the McDonald's distribution centres across the country. I've also participated in things like going out to speak to farmers across the country. My main job within Animal Rebellion, Animal Rising, has always been outreaching to farmers. And along with my colleague Tom is, and he grew up on a dairy farm and he became vegan a few years ago. And my colleague Sarah, who's in the audience here, she grew up in Derbyshire. We decided to create this project called Vegan Support the Farmers. Now, before I tell you a bit more about the project, I'd like to get a bit of feedback from the audience. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Try to keep it PG as possible. What do you think of when I say to you the word farmer? Animal farmers, yes. Anything else? Annoying. Animal abusers, yes. Wheat fields and tractors, okay. What do you think the public perception of farmers is? Wonderful. Heroes. Food suppliers. Good, good. Yet struggling, okay. What do you think of when you hear the word vegan? Legends. Heroes.
Self-righteous.
Self-righteous, okay, yes. We should own it. Let's own it. Okay, what do you think the public's perception of vegans is? Annoying. Preachy. Militant. Yes, all those things. As you can see, there are stereotypes on both sides, and most of these stereotypes are pushed forward in the media. That doesn't really mean that they're true. So, for example, not all farmers wake up every day and go, I am a complete psychopath and I'm going to kill animals. And just like, not all vegans are kind and compassionate all the time. That I've met some really horrible vegans. So stereotypes really don't do us any good, especially when we're trying to reach a community and try to help them to change. We really need to understand people as they are. But why do we need to work with farmers? Well, I'm going to show you this diagram here. This is my supervisor. I'm not going to go into detail about this, so Richard, please lay off me later. But how does social change happen? Well, if we take the example of cultured meat, for example, it's a niche. And what it does here is that it interacts with what we call the regime, which is the agriculture industry, food traditions, our politicians, farmers, things like that. But up above here, we have a lot of pressures of climate change, changing of eating habits, social pressure, more concern about animal welfare. And this pressure forces these niches to be able to come up and to make change within the regime. But there's a lot of resistance here. And the resistance comes from like your industry, your farmers, tradition. I mean, when you talk to the public, most of the time, what do they say? They say that they love eating meat. And where do you go from there when you're faced with that? So instead of focusing just on the solution, which is veganism, and trying to convert people to veganism, we also need to try and focus on where the resistance is. And that's going out into these communities, going to politicians, to institutions, to the key stakeholders, which are farmers, and actually trying to influence them there. So, as I said before, in Animal Rebellion, Animal Rising, since the very beginning, we've always gone out and talked to farmers. From the very first rebellion, where we camped with XR farmers on the streets. Here you can see in 2020, we supported Safe British Farming at a farming rally. You can see some very disgruntled farmers there with our veggies. We've also done things like we had a farmer dialogue tour during our dairy campaign where we shut down all the dairy depots in the UK. We went out and we told farmers exactly why we're blockading them. We've also gone and supported other farmer protests, and we've been to county shows to talk to farmers. So we've been doing a lot of outreach and trying to understand farmers, and what we've found is that a lot of them are suffering from their own issues at the same time. So profits are very low. We're seeing a changing subsidy system since we've left the European Union. Many farmers are facing going bankrupt. But one of the biggest issues that farmers have, apart from the supermarkets, is the mental health crisis. So they are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than the national average. And at the moment, they aren't really sort of getting the help that they need. So when we heard about all of these stories from going out and speaking to farmers and actually making friends with quite a few of them, it really made us think, well, how can we, oh, it's good there. How can we build this basis of a relationship? Because at the moment, going to them and saying to them transition really isn't feasible for them, and they're not really in a position to be able to do it. So how do we start building those relationships? Now, in the vegan movement, we talk a lot about the civil rights movement, and we try to compare our movement to the struggle of Black people. But how are we really resembling the struggle in the civil rights movement? So if you take, for example, Frederick Douglass here, he was a slave. He suffered terribly, lost his family. He had to, once he was free, he had to flee to England because he was fearful that he was going to be sold back to his slave master. He became a figurehead in the anti-slavery movement. But yet, as his ex-slave master was dying, he went to visit him and had several talks with him. And throughout his correspondence and his talks, he always said, "I love you, but I hate slavery." And he always expressed endearment and love for that person, but just not for the system. And whenever there were protests that used violence during the anti-slavery movement, he always condemned the violence itself. Violence will never lead us to where we want to be. It just begets more violence. And then you've got the example here of Daryl Davis. I don't know if many of you know Daryl Davis. Yeah, he's successfully managed to get 200 Ku Klux Klan members to give over their robes. But how he's done it is he's gone out and he's made friends with them. He's gone to their meetings. They invite him to their barbecues. They've gone to his family events. And he's managed to actually get them to give up their robes. And then you've got the example of Martin Luther King. Now, this is one of my favourite quotes. "The method of non-violence seeks not to humiliate and not to defeat the oppressor, but it seeks to win his friendship and his understanding. And thereby, and therefore, the aftermath of this method is reconciliation." How can we reconcile with the farming community? How can we become their friends, essentially? And that was what spurred on Vegan Support the Farmers. We were also inspired by Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. Has everyone seen the movie Pride? Yes. This is very interesting. 2 groups who would never really see themselves getting on. In London, during the miners' strike, a group of gays and lesbians started raising money for a mining village in Wales. Obviously, in those villages, there was a lot of homophobia, and they'd never really encountered gay people. And the same in London, there's people, metropolitan people, really didn't know about the lifestyle of the miners in Wales. But what happened is when they raised this money and we went to the mining village and lived with them, they started to form friendships. And then the next year, the miners led the Gay Pride March in London. It just goes to show you what solidarity really can do, and it can really change hearts and minds. So with that in mind, we set up Vegan Support the Farmers, which is a campaign within the animal rising ecosystem. What that means is we're all animal rising members. We've all done things such as taking non-violent civil disobedience. We've all done things such as rescues and blockades. And we've all got lots of court cases coming up. But we also do these other things as well. So with councils and universities, we're really pushing on the institutional change. With farmers, we're going for the stakeholders, and we're hoping to expand our campaigns to really build this kind of many-pronged attack on the industry. And with Vegan Support the Farmers, what we wanted to do is to unite on issues that we agree on. So things like fair prices for farmers, growing more food, imports down, and listening to farmers, not corporations. And by discussing these issues and going into the farming community and showing that we care about these issues in particular, it means that we're able to effectively work and to be able to get around the table with them. In addition to that, we're also raising £100,000 for young farmer mental health initiatives. And we're going to young farmers clubs and we're giving talks and we're building relationships with the young farmers. What we found is that young people tend to be more receptive. At first, we've had many comments such as, well, when we heard you were coming, we thought we'd hate you, but actually you're all right. Things like that. But we've actually managed to build some really good relationships there. We're also doing a lot of actions as well. So this was our Pink Welly action. This was to show how many farmers have committed suicide in 1 year. And this was outside Westminster. We also got invited to support the farmers at their recent tractor rally in London, where they blockaded Westminster. We had our own truck with our veggies on, and we drove with the farmers as well, with Vegan Support the Farmers, and we gave out samosas too. It was a real privilege to be allowed and to be invited to take part in their parade. And we met a lot of farmers there, and it ended up a very interesting thing that a dairy farmer started trying to support us and defend us against vegans online, which was odd, very odd. So yeah, this is some other pictures from that night. We're also running 4 half marathons over the next year. We've already done one in Wales. We're doing Edinburgh. We're doing Ireland and then North Yorks as well. We've done some videos. We're targeting supermarkets and their practices against farmers. We're going to a lot of vegan markets and vegan fairs to try and raise money. And we also go to farming conferences. So when we went to the Oxford Farming Conference, for instance, made a lot of connections there and got invited to some farms, and we've really started to build those networks. So yeah, this is what we've been doing so far. Many of the things I can't really tell you about because they're just at the beginning of these relationships and they're quite fragile. But we've managed to actually get ourselves as vegans into these farmer spaces. And we're honest about who we are. We're upfront. We tell them that we are vegans, and we're not just vegans, we're vegan activists. We tell them that we do things like blockades and rescues, and we're clear about who we are. We do not compromise on who we are. But it's that honesty that means that either people are going to just turn away from you, but a lot of the time people will respect you and they'll want to talk about their opinions as well. And through doing this work, we have got ourselves into these farming spaces that vegans really haven't accessed before. And what we're hoping is our work over the next year is that we're going to build more allies so that we can actually start advocating more for animals in the space and hopefully build some kind of network towards transition. So I'm going to take some questions now.
Hi. I live in a county, Herefordshire, which is mostly animal agriculture. There's a few on the plains where they grow potatoes and other things, but it's mostly sheep farming. And have you actually had any encounters with farming that's in the what you call the marginal land, where they feel that there's no other prospect for their land use? And what kind of dialogue do you have with farmers of that kind of community?
Yes, we encounter farmers a lot, sheep farmers in particular, who are living on lands that they say cannot be used for anything else. This is the problem, is that we don't have all the answers to these questions. And the only way that we're going to find solutions is to really understand these farmers and the situation they're in. So when we talk about transition, a lot of the biggest resistance comes from culture. How do we get farmers to feel comfortable moving towards a vegan transition that still respects their culture? I think there is an answer to this somewhere, but the only way that we're going to get that answer is to actually build relationships and to understand them as well as them understanding veganism too. So yeah, I don't have the answer to that. I mean, it could be rewilding. The government does need to put in place more subsidies for rewilding, but as we've learnt from each farmer we've talked to, each farm is different and the land is different, and what they know they can do with that farm is very unique to that farmer, and government policy often doesn't reflect that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how overt are you about the goal of transition? Are you saying eventually this is what we want to happen, or are you more focused on building relationships at the moment?
Well, we as ourselves as individuals and as Animal Rising, we're very clear that we want to transition to a plant-based food system. When it comes to, is that a goal for vegans to support the farmers? No. And the reason why is because to transition is extremely difficult. It's very costly. If you speak to a farmer who has transitioned, such as Lawrence Candy, who's transitioned from cows to organic oats and barley, he will say that the system is very locked in. So it's dependent upon animal agriculture. You get money for the inputs and outputs of it. And to move away from that, especially if you're a struggling farmer and the choice is you do something for your ethics or you do something that's going to bankrupt you and your family, I can understand why they wouldn't decide to do that. The market just isn't there. And that's why we need to put pressure on the government to build the infrastructure needed.
I have, I guess, one sort of or two that you sort of follow up on that. I guess, and you touched upon. So, part one is what types of successes or impact have you seen yourself have, and then two, are you involved in any political type advocacy work as well, or is it just sort of more helping farmers?
Well, the successes we've had is this is all about relationships, and what we found is that relationships that we had been building before with Animal Rebellion was the reason why we were invited to the recent farmer tractor rally. It was very interesting because we went to the farmers who organised it down in Kent and they hated us. We just crashed their meeting and they just really did not want us there. It's understandable, but they were very hostile. They were not very nice. We came away from that thinking, God, we're never going to get in there. And then it turns out that they then partnered with Save British Farming, who we have been doing a lot of work with over the years. We were there when they had no one else, and we just turned up and we always gave support. And because of that relationship, the farmer who runs that had a word with the Kent farmers and said, these people are all right. And when we turned up at the rally, the Kent farmers were all lovely with us. So it's a long, slow work, relationship building. And I think that's been the main success so far, is that we are seeing more and more farmers open up and want to talk to us and feel comfortable talking to us. When it comes to political work, that is something we want to move into. This is all part of a plan of laying the foundations, but you have to be able to have those contacts and that network and to understand the industry to then move into the area of political advocacy. So that's what we're hoping to do, especially around policy. How do we move towards a plant-based food system later on?
Hey, I think it's a great campaign. I'm very excited about it. One question that I have is I feel like a lot of vegans and particularly vegan activists might be quite hostile towards it. Farmers, for a long time have been the enemy, not the collaborator, as you sort of gestured at in your speech. And I'm curious what kind of, what your relationships have been like with the other activists. I'm sure you know some who have been against the idea and how you've been getting more vegans on side.
Well, what we've found when we've been going to vegan markets is, we'll get vegans come up and they'll go, we hate farmers, animal abusers, immediately, that's the thing. Then you talk about the issues in farming, how they really feel. The vegan values of compassion, which is essentially non-violence. And people do start changing their minds. There's always going to be some who don't. But I do question whether this need to have an enemy that you're fighting against, who you don't humanise, who you see as just evil, how healthy that is. Because what we find that's not real life. Stereotypes, people are not, black and white. It's really not like that. And it just goes back to what essentially is, and this is animal rising, animal rebellion is built on the basis of non-violence, and we all hold it not just as a tactic, but as something that we live in our hearts. And the idea is that we want to build friendships and reconciliation. We don't think we're going to get to a vegan world just by wholesale destroying the farming industry. These people own the land, and they have a lot of public respect and public opinion. So yeah.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. I thought it was really interesting, and I think, it's just super exciting work that you're doing. We've kind of discussed it a bit, but I was curious just how that initial conversation goes. Like, if there's a farmer who, say, is a chicken farmer and sees that you're vegan and just says, you want me to not have a job, basically, how do you respond to that?
But it's not that we don't want him to have a job. I think a lot of farmers they have these preconceived notions too. They think that vegans, we just want farmers to completely go bankrupt and not be food producers anymore. And we kind of explain that actually we don't want them to lose a job. What we want them to do is to not exploit animals, which is vastly different. We still want them to stay within the food production sector, and we need them to, because our food security in this country is pitiful. It's extremely low, and we are susceptible to a lot of shocks when it comes to the trade links. So we try to explain to farmers that we don't hate them. We love them as a person, but we hate the action. And I think for a lot of farmers, that's the first time they've really heard that, because they too also listen to the media, which tells them that vegans are, want to kill them. And they do. A lot of farmers have told me that they've had death threats and things like that. So I think the farming media does tend to push that view of vegans too, that we're dangerous.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So my question is, we've got a lot of farms around where we live. Firstly, do we need to collaborate with one of you to help us? So say if we wanted to go and have a conversation with a farmer, how do we go about it? Can we do it on our own? Or is it better to link up with you, tell one of the team to come and then we can do it together? And secondly, just, how do we go about it? Because there's, even if you look at the map of England, right, it's just full of squares, green squares, the whole lot of it. There's so many to go through. So is there a strategy, some sort of book or something, like in whatever strategies to do it, pretty much?
Well, it's a good question. We are actually running farmer dialogue trainings. They take place on the last Wednesday of each month at 7 p.m. You can find information about them on our website. And it's 2 hours, and we go through what our technique is to talk to farmers and give you information about farming. And hopefully that will give you the confidence that you need to go out and just spark up a conversation. But you can always get into contact with us if you need any help.
I just want to say there's been a change to the schedule. So if you're looking to go to The Power of Undercover Investigations in Animal Rights Advocacy by Claire Palmer, that is happening immediately after this, starting at 12:30. Yeah. So we've got time for about 2 more questions. And then if you want to run off to that, then that is happening straight after.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the talk. Very inspiring. You mentioned that the ecosystem is not there yet for the farmers to transition. Like, what are the kind of like the lowest hanging fruit farmers in terms of, you know, where they're most likely to transition? Because I mean, you already mentioned the sheep farmers. You know, they cannot really grow something. But is it like the chicken farmers being able to shift to mushrooms or cannabis, or is it the pig farmers, or like? I mean, where do you see the biggest road to, you know, making it actually economically viable for farmers to shift?
That's a very good question. I think personally it would be using a lot of farms are mixed farms, so the land is used for growing crops too. I think it would be moving into areas such as growing oats for oat milk. We had a conversation with Oatly, for instance, and Oatly would love to be able to buy all their oats from the UK, but we just don't have the supply for it. We don't have infrastructure such as to isolate pea protein in this country. We would need the government to be investing in these plant agriculture infrastructure systems, which they're not doing. So at the moment, it's still extremely difficult, but that's where I would see most viability. The farmers who are most at risk are sheep farmers, especially hill farmers. They used to gain a vast amount of their profit from the subsidy system, and now that's being wiped out. So they are most likely going to either go bankrupt, leave, and the land will be available. But yes, we don't really have the government willpower there to be investing in the plant-based food transition, unfortunately.
Hey, and so I've kind of heard stories that in a lot of animal advocacy kind of conversations, the public basically see farmers as like the most trustworthy people. And I know there's some data about that in other countries like Sweden. Do we have any kind of good data on how much the British public like trusts farmers and sees them as a source of authority in a lot of the kind of debates we engage in? And
yes, there has been numerous surveys done, I have to say by the Farming Press, but Farmers Guardian has done some surveys, and I think it's around about the 80 percentile of people are favourable towards farmers, think they do a necessary job in this country, which reflects, as you say, across Europe as well. When the recent farming protests that have been happening in France, in Belgium, also Netherlands and Germany, they've had overwhelming public support, despite the fact that they use the same tactics as Just Stop Oil. But yeah, no, they're not fighting against fossil fuels, so they're the good ones.